I never meant for any of this to happen. That's what everyone says, right? But I truly didn't. At 45, I was supposed to be settling into a comfortable routine, not falling headlong into the kind of love that turns your world upside down. Yet here I am, sitting on my back porch in Jacksonville as the sun sets over the inland waterway, wondering how my life changed so dramatically in just 8 months. The breeze carries the salt of the Atlantic, and I can almost hear Evan's laughter mingling with the distant crash of waves. God, I miss him already, and he's only been gone 3 days. This wasn't supposed to be my story. Not at my age, not after everything I'd been through. But sometimes life has other plans. Plans that grab you by the shoulders and shake you awake just when you think you've figured it all out. I should start at the beginning. That scorching July afternoon, when my perfectly ordered world began to unravel. I'd been pushing myself too hard that day, trying to outrun memories of my ex-husband, David. 3 years divorced, and I was still carrying his criticisms like stones in my pockets. "You're getting soft, Tasha," he used to say, his eyes coldly appraising my body like it was property that had depreciated. 7 years of that had left its mark, and I compensated by driving myself relentlessly, both in my work as a fitness instructor and in my personal training. That day, I decided to run the entire stretch of Jacksonville Beach, pushing through the humidity that hung like a wet blanket over Florida in July. By mile 5, my calves were screaming, but I kept going, David's voice in my head urging me to push through the weakness. That's when it happened. A sharp pain shot through my left leg, and suddenly I was on the sand, clutching my calf muscle as tears sprung to my eyes. I tried to stand, but my leg buckled. The beach was relatively empty in the late afternoon heat, the tourists having retreated to air-conditioned restaurants and hotels. I contemplated calling an Uber, but realized my phone was nearly dead. That's when a shadow fell across me, and I squinted up to see a silhouette backlit by the merciless sun. "You okay there?" The voice was deep but gentle, tinged with concern. "Just a muscle cramp," I managed, trying to maintain some dignity as I sat awkwardly in the sand. "It'll pass." He crouched down beside me, and I got my first clear look at him. Sun-bleached hair, tousled by the sea breeze. Eyes the color of the ocean at dawn. Skin bronzed by constant exposure to the sun. Young, much younger than me. My first thought was almost maternal. He couldn't be much older than some of my clients' kids. "That doesn't look like just a cramp," he said, nodding toward my leg. "Mind if I take a look? I'm a lifeguard here." Before I could protest, he was gently examining my calf, his touch professional, but somehow intimate in a way that made me acutely aware of how long it had been since a man had touched me with any kind of care. "You've got a pretty bad strain," he said, looking up at me. "I'm Evan, by the way. Evan Torres." "Tasha Monroe," I replied, wincing as he probed the tender muscle. "Well, Tasha Monroe, you're not walking back to wherever you came from on this leg. Where's your car?" I pointed vaguely toward the distant parking lot, and before I knew what was happening, he'd helped me to my feet, one strong arm around my waist. "I can manage," I protested, though we both knew I couldn't. "I'm sure you can," he said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "But humor me, okay? It's been a slow day, and rescuing beautiful women is kind of my thing." I almost laughed at the absurdity of being called beautiful by this young Adonis, who probably flirted with college girls all day. At 45, with my short golden curls starting to show hints of gray despite my best efforts, I was nobody's idea of a beach beauty. The walk to my car took nearly 20 minutes, his arm steady around me the whole way. We talked about nothing in particular. The weather, how the beach seemed different this summer, the new coffee shop that had opened on the boardwalk. Normal, inconsequential things that somehow felt significant in the moment. When we reached my car, I thanked him and fumbled for my keys, suddenly awkward. I hadn't been alone with a man other than David in so long that I'd forgotten the basic mechanics of casual interaction. "Listen," he said as I unlocked the door. "There's a place just up the road that makes incredible iced coffee. Let me buy you one, for the memory of your rescue." I should have politely declined. I should have thanked him again and driven home to ice my leg and forget this embarrassing episode. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Lead the way, lifeguard." He grinned, and something fluttered in my chest, an unfamiliar sensation I chose to ignore. We ended up at a tiny beachside cafe, sitting at a weathered wooden table as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the deck. Evan insisted on grabbing our drinks, returning with an iced Americano for me. How did he know? And something blended and frozen for himself. "So, Tasha Monroe," he said, settling across from me, "what brings you out running in the heat of the day when any sensible Floridian is inside with the AC cranked?" Something about his direct gaze made me want to tell the truth. "Outrunning demons," I said, then immediately regretted it. "I mean, just trying to stay in shape. I'm a fitness instructor." "At Ocean's Edge?" he asked, naming one of the upscale fitness clubs in the area. I nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" I've seen you there. My mom's a member." He smiled, and I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Of course, I probably reminded him of his mother. "She says you're the only instructor who doesn't make her feel ancient." I laughed despite myself. "That's my specialty, the 'you're not dead yet' workout." We talked for nearly 2 hours. I learned that he was 28, 17 years younger than me, my brain helpfully calculated, that he'd grown up in Jacksonville, that besides lifeguarding, he restored vintage bicycles in his spare time and sold them at local markets. He loved the water, had a tattoo of a wave on his shoulder, which he showed me, rolling up the sleeve of his faded t-shirt to reveal a beautiful blue swirl that seemed to move with the muscles beneath his skin, and lived in a small apartment near the beach with his rescue dog, Neptune. In turn, I told him about my work, my passion for zipline adventures, and how I was slowly making my way through all the national parks. I mentioned my divorce in passing, keeping the details vague. Something about Evan made me want to present the best version of myself, the woman I was becoming, not the one who had spent 7 years shrinking herself to fit into David's increasingly narrow vision. As twilight descended and the cafe began to empty, I realized we were the last customers. My leg had stiffened while we sat, and I winced as I stood. "Let me help you back to your car," Evan said, his hand automatically finding my elbow. The casual touch sent warmth spreading through me. "I can manage," I said, but accepted his help anyway, hyper-aware of his proximity as we walked slowly back to the parking lot. At my car, I thanked him again, more awkwardly this time. The easy conversation of the cafe seemed to have evaporated in the evening air. "You should ice that when you get home," he said, "and maybe take a couple days off from running." "Yes, Dr. Torres," I teased, immediately wondering if I sounded ridiculous trying to flirt at my age. But he smiled, and then, hesitantly, asked for my number. "You know, in case you need emergency lifeguard services again." I gave it to him, certain he would never use it, probably just being kind to the older woman who'd interrupted his day. I drove home that night with my windows down, the salt air filling my car, trying not to replay our conversation in my head, and failing miserably. 3 days later, he texted, "How's the leg? Ready for your next beach marathon?" I stared at the message for a full 5 minutes before responding. Doctor's orders were to stick to swimming for a while. "Know any good places?" His response was immediate. "As a matter of fact, I'm quite the swimming expert. Free lesson tomorrow?" And that's how it began. So innocently that I didn't see it coming. A swimming lesson that turned into lunch. Lunch that extended into a walk along the shore. My leg miraculously improved. A text the next day asking if I wanted to try the new Korean restaurant that had opened downtown, since I'd mentioned loving the cuisine. I told myself it was friendship, that Evan was just a kind, social soul who'd taken pity on a middle-aged woman, that the flutter in my stomach when his name appeared on my phone was merely the novelty of male attention after years in the wilderness of post-divorce solitude. But 3 weeks later, as we sat on the beach at sunset sharing takeout bibimbap, Evan turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something, Tasha?" I nodded, mouth full of spicy vegetables and rice. "Is this weird for you? Us hanging out like this?" I swallowed hard, my heart suddenly racing. "Define weird." "I like you." He said it simply, without preamble or qualification. "And I think you like me too, but you seem hesitant, and I'm wondering if it's because of the age thing." The age thing. 17 years suddenly seemed like an unbridgeable chasm. I looked away, focusing on the waves turning gold in the setting sun. Evan, I'm old enough to. If you say you're old enough to be my mother, I'm going to throw sand at you, he interrupted, his eyes serious despite the playful threat. My mother is 62 and wears holiday sweaters year-round. You're nothing like her. I laughed despite myself. Still, I'm 45. You're 28. People will talk. Let them. He reached over and took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. I don't care what anyone thinks. I care about how I feel when I'm with you. And how is that? I whispered, hardly believing we were having this conversation. Like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. When he kissed me, the sun was just dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to mirror the warmth blooming in my chest. His lips were soft, the kiss gentle but insistent, and I felt something long dormant within me, stirring to life. I pulled away first, breathless and confused. Evan, I don't know if I can do this. My life is complicated. Everyone's life is complicated, he said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. That's not a reason not to try. But there were reasons, so many reasons, that this was a bad idea. My ex-husband's voice in my head, telling me I was making a fool of myself. The inevitable judgment from friends and colleagues. The simple biological reality that Evan was in his prime while I was facing the slow decline into middle age. The fact that he would probably want children someday, while my chance for that had passed. I came up with every excuse over the next few weeks, all while falling deeper under his spell. Evan was persistent but patient, never pushing too hard, but making it clear he wasn't going anywhere. He showed up at my classes, bringing me coffee afterward. He texted me photos of spectacular sunrises from his morning shifts at the beach. He learned which national parks I'd yet to visit and left brochures on my car. Slowly, I began to let my guard down. We started going out publicly, dinner at restaurants where I might run into people I knew, movies where we sat holding hands in the darkness like teenagers. I introduced him to Korean cooking at my place, and he taught me to surf. Or tried to. I spent more time falling off the board than standing on it, but his encouraging whoops each time I managed to catch even the smallest wave made me feel like a champion. The first time we made love, I almost backed out. Standing in my bedroom as Evan kissed my neck, I was suddenly paralyzed by insecurity. My body, while fit, bore the marks of life, stretch marks from weight fluctuations during my marriage, the beginning of softness around my middle that no amount of core work seemed to eliminate. How could I compare to the lithe young women Evan surely encountered every day? As if reading my thoughts, he pulled back, his eyes serious. You're beautiful, Tasha. Every inch of you. Stop thinking whatever you're thinking. How do you know what I'm thinking? I challenged, crossing my arms protectively over my chest. Because I know you. He gently uncrossed my arms, taking my hands in his. And I know someone taught you to doubt yourself. But they were wrong. That night, Evan loved me with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes. In his arms, I felt young and beautiful, and worthy in a way I hadn't in years. Perhaps ever. Afterward, as we lay tangled in my sheets, the ceiling fan stirring the humid night air, I realized with a start that I was falling in love with him. The thought terrified me. Love meant vulnerability, and vulnerability had nearly destroyed me before. David had started out loving me too, before his love curdled into possession, control, and eventually contempt. What if Evan changed too? What if this was just a phase, his version of a midlife crisis played out on a woman actually experiencing midlife? These fears kept me from saying the words, though they burned in my throat every time he looked at me with those ocean eyes. Instead, I showed him in other ways, cooking his favorite meals, remembering small details about his childhood, learning to appreciate the intricacies of surfboard design. And Evan, perceptive as always, seemed to understand my hesitation. 3 months into our relationship, the whispers started. A client at the gym asked pointedly about my young friend she'd seen me with at a restaurant. A colleague made a joke about robbing the cradle When Evan came to pick me up after work, my few close friends expressed concern. Not about Evan specifically, but about the potential for heartbreak when he inevitably moved on to someone his own age. The worst came when we ran into David at a farmer's market downtown. I hadn't seen my ex-husband in over a year, and the sight of him, still handsome in that cold, calculating way, made my stomach clench. He noticed us before we could escape, his eyes taking in Evan's protective stance beside me, our intertwined fingers. "Tasha," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "How unexpected." I introduced them stiffly, watching David assess Evan with the same critical eye he'd once turned on me. I could see the exact moment he calculated the age difference, his mouth twisting into a smirk. "Well," he said finally, "I suppose congratulations are in order. Though, Tasha, I would have thought you'd learned your lesson about setting yourself up for disappointment." Evan's hand tightened around mine, but before he could speak, I found my voice. "The only disappointment in my life was the 7 years I spent with you, David. A mistake I don't intend to repeat." I pulled Evan away, my heart pounding, waiting for the familiar flood of shame and inadequacy that usually followed encounters with my ex. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a surge of something like pride, not just at standing up to David, but at being the woman Evan had chosen, despite having a world of younger, less complicated options before him. That night, curled against Evan's chest as a thunderstorm raged outside, I finally said the words that had been building inside me. "I love you." He pulled me closer, his lips brushing my forehead. "I know, I've been waiting for you to catch up." The months that followed were the happiest of my life. We settled into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. Weekends exploring Florida's hidden gems, springs with water so clear you could see every grain of sand on the bottom, tiny coastal towns with the best seafood I'd ever tasted, nature preserves where we spotted manatees drifting lazily in the warm waters. Evenings spent cooking together in my kitchen, dancing to the old soul music I loved, or the indie bands he introduced me to. Nights when passion gave way to the deep intimacy of whispered conversations in the dark. Evan became a fixture at my gym, charming the older clients and good-naturedly enduring their matchmaking attempts until they realized he was there for me. We celebrated his 29th birthday with a surprise party I organized with his friends, most of whom, to my relief, seemed to accept me without question once they saw how happy Evan was. But paradise, as they say, never lasts. 6 months into our relationship, Evan was offered a position with the National Park Service as a wilderness first responder. His dream job, combining his lifeguard skills with his love of nature. The only catch? It was at Olympic National Park in Washington state, literally the opposite corner of the country. When he told me, standing in my kitchen with the job offer email open on his phone, I felt the world tilt beneath me. I should have been happy for him. I tried to be. But all I could think was, this is it. The natural end I've been waiting for. That's amazing, I managed, turning away to hide the tears suddenly blurring my vision. "When do they want you to start?" "In 3 weeks, he said, his voice strangely flat. "But Tasha, I haven't accepted yet." I whirled around. "What? Why not? This is what you've always wanted." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of inner conflict. "Because of us. Because my life is here now. With you." The selfless thing would have been to insist he take the job, to assure him that we would find a way to make it work. But I couldn't form the words. The thought of losing him, of returning to my solitary life after knowing the joy of being loved by Evan, was unbearable. "What are you saying?" I asked instead, hope and fear warring within me. "I'm saying I love you, and I don't want to leave you. But I also don't want to be the reason you give up your life here." He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, taking my hands in his. "Come with me, Tasha." The question hung between us, impossible and exhilarating. Leave Jacksonville? The city where I'd rebuilt my life after David, where I had a career, clients who depended on me, the small circle of friends who'd supported me through my darkest days. "I can't just uproot my entire life," I said, even as part of me was already imagining misty forests and rugged coastlines. "My job, my apartment." "You can find a job anywhere with your skills," Evan said, his eyes intense. And homes, too. I'm not saying it would be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. I pulled away, needing space to think. This is all happening so fast. I know, he sighed, leaning against the counter. And I don't want to pressure you. If you need me to stay, I will. There will be other opportunities. But I knew that wasn't true. Positions like this didn't come along often, and Evan had been working toward this goal since before he met me. To ask him to give it up would be to doom our relationship anyway. He would resent me eventually, no matter how much he loved me now. Let me think about it, I said finally. Please? He nodded, pulling me into an embrace that felt both like a promise and a goodbye. The next week was agony. I made lists of pros and cons, talked myself into and out of a dozen different scenarios, and lay awake at night imagining a life 3,000 miles away from everything familiar. I called my sister in Arizona, the only family member I was still close to after my divorce had fractured so many relationships. You're asking the wrong question, she said, after listening to me agonize for nearly an hour. It's not, should I move across the country for a man? It's, do I want to build a life with this particular person, regardless of geography? Her words stayed with me as I drove to the beach the next day. Our beach, where Evan and I had first met. He was working, and I watched him from a distance for a while, confident and capable as he scanned the water, occasionally blowing his whistle to warn swimmers away from a rip current. I thought about how, at 45, I'd assumed certain doors had closed for me. That passion and adventure were behind me, that my future held, at best, comfortable companionship with someone as scarred by life as I was. Instead, I'd found Evan, young, yes, but with an old soul that matched perfectly with mine. Someone who saw me clearly and loved what he saw. Someone who challenged me to be braver, to trust again, to believe I deserved joy. Could I really let that go because I was afraid of change? I made my decision standing there on the sand, watching the man I loved do the work he was born for. When his shift ended, I was waiting by the lifeguard station, my heart pounding, but my mind clear. I'll go, I said before he could even speak. To Washington, with you. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun emerging from clouds. He picked me up and spun me around, right there in front of everyone. And for once, I didn't care who saw or what they thought. Are you sure? He asked when he finally set me down, his hands cupping my face. Really sure? No, I admitted with a laugh. I'm terrified, but I'm more afraid of not trying, of letting fear steal this chance from us. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparations. I gave notice at my gym, finding suitable replacements for my classes, and promising my favorite clients I'd help them set up virtual training sessions. I put my apartment up for sublet, packed only what would fit in my car, and said tearful goodbyes to friends who seemed genuinely happy for me despite their initial reservations. And now, here I am, waiting for Evan to return from scouting rental properties near Port Angeles. In 3 days, we'll load up our cars and begin the cross-country drive to our new life. At 45, I'm starting over. Not because I have to, but because I choose to. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe we'll thrive in the Pacific Northwest, building a life among ancient forests and wild coastlines. Maybe the reality of living together full-time will reveal incompatibilities we've been blind to. Maybe Evan will wake up one morning and realize he's tied himself to a woman who will be 60 before he's 45. Or maybe, just maybe, we'll beat the odds. Maybe love really can bridge 17 years, 2 coasts, and all the fears that still sometimes wake me in the night. What I do know is this. For the first time in my adult life, I'm following my heart instead of my fears. I'm choosing possibility over safety. I'm believing that I deserve this chance at happiness, regardless of my age or past mistakes. And that feels like the biggest adventure of all. The sun has set now, the sky deepening to indigo over the water. My phone buzzes with a text from Evan. Found the perfect place. Can't wait to show you tomorrow. I love you. I smile, typing back. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. And I do, God help me, I do.